I grew up in this area. My name is Frank Zuvela, and I'm the last of the original first generation. And for the last 6 years, I've been conducting a tour. What we're standing on right now is hallowed ground at the moment. Mike Budnick and a fellow by the name of Joe Pulpitch had an idea what to do with this little piece of property. So Joe and he came up with the idea, why don't we build a memorial to the original settlers? Now these stones were laid on hands and knees, and the fee was $100 per stone. And we had just enough area, so we calculated the area, the amount of families that we had to squeeze in here and make room for the streets, and this is the end result. Now we're ready to start the tour. This itself was a fishing community. It was pre-settled originally by the Duwamish Indian tribe. But they left and they went to, what's the name of that tribe, John? Suquamish. They moved the tribe over there. And so it was settled by the Croatian fishermen. They were fishermen in the old country. All coastal people, and then the islands that belonged to, at that time, it was Austria, then it became Yugoslavia, and then after the war it was divided and became Croatia. That's where the majority of these people came from. So, they were fishermen. When they first came here, the river, Duwamish River, which is just beyond these big warehouses that you see. That's where the river starts. And in those days, this whole lower plateau, Harbor Island was not there. When it came down, this was all flats. And what they did, the city fathers, they created Harbor Island. That's man-made. And that portion, the greater portion of that fill was when they decided to eliminate the tide flats, and they have a West Duwamish River and a East Duwamish River. And they, years ago, these fishermen started fishing in Elliott Bay, which is the bay right in front of the Greater Seattle. They fished there with small boats, and when they netted, they used to use oars to row and circle the fish. Fast forward, they started to get engines, one-lugger, two-cylinder engines, and that way they were able to travel a little further because they found out that the value of the fish, food-wise, the closer it got to the spawning grounds, the food value on that particular fish started to deteriorate. In fact, as soon as they get the taste of fresh water, the food content diminishes. So then they involved bigger engines, larger boats. They discovered the further out they went, the quality of the fish was much better. And it got to the point where the boats were large enough. This is called a purse seiner. This is a silhouette of my brother-in-law's boat. They also lived in the same house that we did. And when their family integrated with our family, we had about 9 people living there at that time.
That's the St. Nicholas, right?
This is the St. Nicholas. Now this boat right here is still net fishing. On the with the purse seine, they encircle the fish, bring the ends together, and they have what they call a purse line, which brings up and closes the bottom. Then they start at one end to retrieve the net, and the fish, of course, are being schooled closer to the very end. And the fish that are there dipped out with a great big brailer where they can dip about 300 fish at a time, and it's about 4 or 5 feet across and the depth of about another 5, 6 feet. So that can hold about 300 fish every dip. On gill netting, which I became, I had a boat also, so did my brothers. This is my older silhouette of my brother's older brother's boat. And the nets are laid across tide in a long line. And you fish at night. The fish hit this, they're moving with the tide, and they get tangled on their gills. That's why it's called gill netting. Now the boat owners are identified over there, the boats that they had. My name is over there also, my 2 other brothers. And, but the fishing first started with these Croatians, I found out, in the Columbia River. In the Columbia River, they were fishing the fish out with these seiners and gill nets. So the state of Oregon and the state of Washington closed that down. In turn, with the boats that they had, they went out and fished the ocean, went north to meet the fish on their migration. Some of them went into Puget Sound, and this was one of the ports. The Croatian fishermen were located, number 1, here in Riverside, the Seattle. They were in Winslow, Bainbridge Island. They were in Tacoma. They were in Bellingham. They were in Anacortes. They all knew each other before they came to this country or after they met on the fishing grounds. So this is where they reared their families, and now we'll start our walking tour. This tour that we'll take is one of the 4 routes that I chose. And I chose this today because this will cover the residences and they identified the people who live there. Right here was the Budnick grocery store. Right in this area right here, the Hugives that owned that house right there, they lived in that house there. That little house that you see in the back was once, I think that's been remodeled, but it was located right behind the garden here. And one of the first tenants, Maria and Mike Pulpitch, Joe's parents, lived in that. Okay. These houses right here that you see, the 2 houses here, they are original. These houses got to be 150 years old, but well maintained and look a lot like did when I was growing up here. The Hugiv family has to be one of the first in this area. They had a fishing boat. The name of the boat was Genevieve H. The house right next to the Hugivs was the Zitkovich family. They also were boat owners. The name of their boat was the Rough Rider, a 65-footer. And the fishing was passed on, after the parents had passed on. Steve and Carl Zitkovich were their only 2 sons. They took over the boat fishing. And then Carl met a gal from California. He sold his half to Steve, and Steve became the sole owner. The mother continued to live here until she was in her late 80s, early 90s. I don't know who lives there now, but the house is very well kept. I've been in that house. It's beautiful. Incidentally, you see the garages here? That is not how it looked when I was a little kid. Their front yards, there was a real slope, and it came about to here. Advent of the cars. They were one of the very few, first, these 2 families. to get cars. Now you can park the car on the street, but you see now, there wasn't that many cars. So what did they do? They cut the bank away, and this is the result. They put in those garages. Now on this corner right here, the shape of the corner, that was a two-story apartment building. It was owned by a Mr. Shroud. Obviously, he wasn't a Croatian, but he fit in, he melded into the crowd beautifully. He was one of the original owners. Now, behind this property, there were two houses, two houses up on the 18th. There's one that you can see right there. Its access is off of 18th, and 18th is right below those trees. So there's one house there and another one here, belong to the same people. And after the war, I understand, this is the Pulpitch family. They bought that house, and that's where the Bajociches lived, in that gray house. And then the next house over was the Erlevich family. You've heard of them? Okay. They were fishing families. This was the Pulpitch property. They also were boat owners. Tony Pulpitch, I think the history, from what I gathered, had several boats. And the only one that left here was Pauline. You knew Pauline, and you knew Mary. Yep. And all the rest of the families,
they grew up
this is where they grew up. And when we were kids, see this slope right here? With barrel staves in the snow, we used to strap a barrel stave on there and slide down and stop right here. But I never did take up skiing. This house, this little house, and the one behind was owned by the Vukov family. I don't believe that they were a relative of the other Vukov family. Would you know that? They were related? I know they came from Zlatin.
Zlatin, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
The Pulpitches, these people here, they're from the island of Susak.
Susak, yeah.
Yeah, or what they call
Sansigo, yeah.
Right? Yeah. So there was, you got you guys that are Corchulani, Velaluka,
Yeah.
Susak, and Zlatin. Those are the
That's correct.
Three big islands that they came from.
So the Vukovs owned that house, and that little house behind, that was his wine making shed.
Is that right?
Yeah, right there. And they also owned this, and a lot of the single bachelor fishermen would rent that and live there. This is where Blackie came to the country. That's where I first saw him. What was his last name? Tarbocha? Pulpitch. This was the Vukovs. Now this house right here, the red one, that was when I first got to know the people, that it was owned by a family, the Meziches. They moved to California. They also were fishing families, moved to California and never did come back. And then there was several Slav families that lived there. The Marines lived there. Pascal Magnus and his wife lived there. Eva Pulpitch lived, that was one of the last place she lived. She lived there. The owners, but they were Slavic family. Now the next house is the house that I grew up in. This house right here. When I went to school and when I was a kid, we had, you can't see it here, 52 stairs. 52 stairs here to the back door. And I went up there many, many times. And old people wouldn't come to our front door who would call us. They would drive around the back and come in the back door. Now, this home here, after our family left, was occupied by my sister and her family, the Plenkoviches. He was the one that had the fishing boat that I showed you down below there at the memorial. My sister was the last Slav person that lived here, and she lived to be 88 years old. And what you see the street, right, I'll make a comment on the street. This, when I was growing up, was a dirt road. And we had the city put in a 2-plank wide sidewalk on that side, but on this side there wasn't any sidewalks. Just prior to the war, I think it was in 1936 or 1937, the city came through here. They took out all the wooden sewer pipes. They put in tile pipes. They put in a new water line. And we never had fire hydrants before, but they also put in the fire hydrants. And what they did, they widened the street also. So that's why you see that bulkhead is there, because they had to chop out. And believe it or not, when I was a kid, I had to mow this every week with a hand sickle. And my dad would sit right there on the porch, and he wouldn't let me go swimming in the afternoon down in the river until I met his okay.
So your dad was born in Vela Luka, right?
My dad was born in Vela Luka.
And your mom was?
1885. My dad was born 1885. My mom was born 1888.
And your mom was from Vela Luka as well?
No. My mother was born on Sutivan Brach.
Oh, really?
When she was 5 years old, the family moved to Split. She also had 4 older sisters. She also had a great aunt that lived in Bellingham, Washington. So they were barren. They couldn't have any children. They tried to get one of the older sisters to come on over. They refused to leave the old country. They shipped my mother over. She was 5 years old. Of course, she was chaperoned all the way. But she did, and my dad met her at a wedding in Bellingham. And subsequently, they were married. They fell in love and got married. And here's one thing that I didn't know until last year. We received some papers from one of the Jaramillo kids. It was papers that Clara left behind after she passed. And in that stack of papers that they gave to me was an envelope full of all the information of my father and mother. My mother's name, as we knew it, was Jenny. But you know what? It's even on the tombstone, Jenny. Yeah. We got the original marriage certificate. My mother's name was Eva. We never knew that. And she also signed it, the marriage license in Bellingham, Eva.
What was her last name before she got married?
Milicic.
Milicic. But
So,
your dad had a nickname though too. What did they call your dad?
Levro.
Yeah.
Levro.
Everybody had a nickname in this
Yeah.
neighborhood too, right?
Everybody had a nickname. Yep. Onward. Now right here, we've gone on this side. We passed the Vukov property. As far as I can figure out, and John asked me that question earlier, I think that they were one of the first settlers here. He had a big piece of property. He had a big, big garden area that met that house, down at the Y, that Mr. Shouty's property. He also had a big garden spot, and the two properties met. John Vukov was a gardener. He had a thriving garden all the time. He also raised the ducks and geese. and chickens too. But below, his house was a two-story house. He rented the bottom part. That's where Nick Volkov first came in Maria. Then he had 1, 2, 3 cabins, and then he built a 2-car garage. Another family that got the car. That came down to, so the property went all the way through. Okay, now right here was the Gergich property. There was 2 Gergich families. This was Visco Gergich and his wife, Antonia.
Also from Zlotting, too.
Also from Zlotting, yep. This was the Gergich family. Now, they had a 2-story house. There was a walkway from the sidewalk here straight into the upper story. The lower story was a rental. And Slav people, many of them used to rent the bottom, and as their families grew, you know, it was only so big, you had to move away. So, but they did, and this was their last, where they lasted to their end, right here. Now, below the Gergich family, on the 16th down there, was a Boswell. He was, he lost his leg from the knee down during World War I. That's what a story that I heard. And he had a John Silver peg leg. It would just fit on, you know, and it was straight down with a little bit of rubber on the very bottom. You know what we used to do as kids? Tried to sneak up behind him and pull that out from under him. But you know what? I swore he had eyes behind his head because he always carried that cane. And just about the time you're ready to trip him, bingo, he'd come back with that cane and he would get you. But he had a row of cabins all the way around. Some were occupied by Slavs, other by transients. Okay. And this was all a part of the Boswell property.
So over
right
there,
here.
those are our houses too, huh?
That's one of the original cabins. That's a story in itself, off of 16th. So I won't talk about that right now. But this was the Boswell property, and it came all the way through. Now this property from the Gus Pulpitch property, where he had the store, was where all that stuff is located. And he owned it from the street all the way through up to here, and he had apartments. He had a 2-story apartment house up here, all by Slavs. They lived in the lower story. Then they had the back end of the store where your grandpa lived, and the store and storage on to the street. Now right here, this place right here was Jack Vidlich. There was 4 Vidlich brothers that came from the old country. Jack was the first one. He sponsored all 4 other 3 brothers, and they came from the island of Vis in the Adriatic Sea. On the other side of Gus Pulpitch's store were 2 brothers, John Vidlich, who had the Catherine M. His first boat was the Elliot. Then Luca had the 2 brothers, and the 2 brothers has a story behind it in itself. The 2 brothers were owned by Chris and Nick Caiaphas.
Greeks.
Yeah, they had that boat first before they built the big boat. That's the one that Steve Trudich ran for them for years. Anyhow, this is where Jack lived. John lived side by side. Luca and John were the other 2 Vidlich brothers, and they had a 4th brother named Mike. Now Mike is, I guess, I would hate to use that word, black sheep of the family, but he was a man that did a lot of things.
Good for you.
Most of them not good.
Not very.
Well, anyhow, that was the 4th brother. But Jack never owned a boat, but he fished with these two brothers and with the Zitkovich, and he fished on all the boats. Well, he lived here until he was, when I got out of the service in 1945, he was still alive. And I think he died, he had to be in his late 80s. He died, I understand that they didn't even attend his funeral. Now right here, there was a little, wait a minute, there it is. The Pulpitch house. This is the Mike Pulpitch. He was the brother to Gus Pulpitch, who had the store. He and this is where Joe, their son, lived. He was one of the guys that got the first idea of building that monument. And there was a stairway that went, look, it's all overgrown. I don't know how they get there now, but they had this part over here. There was a little one-room cabin that they used to rent out. And then the rest was all garden. Everybody had their gardens. Now right here, in this section right here, was the Pete Kovich family. You know, up there that were, what's that one? Station, gas station.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very famous in West Seattle. From here, they moved to there, and they built the gas station, and they lived in that little house right behind the gas station.
In Ballard, right?
No, well, that's the son.
Oh, that's the son.
That's the son that got the marine thing in Ballard. But this is where they lived right here. That house is no longer there. They were one of the first people to move from Riverside when I still lived here. The Pete Kovich family. Now this is the back end of the Luka Vidlich's house. His property went all the way up to here. The whole back end was all garden. This property right here was owned by the Pasinich family, a large family. And last year when I had my tour, the lady that lives there now came up and she wondered what I was doing here. And I had all this group of people, and I told her. She was so glad to know the beginnings of her house. And behind that was a big garden space. And this was a large family, the Pasinich family. Most of them wound up in California fishing. Okay, now right here was the Vlasich family. When we get up, we'll get a better view of it. That's where, this was a boarding house. This is where most of the bachelors that came from the old country, this is where they got their start, in that house right there. And then of course all the property was all garden. All the way on that side and around.
Frank, why don't we take a walk down to 16th and do a little bit of filming down there?
Okay. Yeah, boy, how this is so changed. It almost breaks my heart, John, to see all this stuff. You know, the doors were never closed. You can go to just drop in on some family, and if it happened to be dinner time or whatever, there was a place for you. Nobody ever locked their doors. There was no crime at that time. They all spoke the same language. It was just like one great big family. All right, now, this was a grocery store, and this was the community hall. And right here was the door to go upstairs. And the family lived upstairs. I've been up there many times. There was a door right there. And then they had a big window here, a display window, This was one of the 5 stores. They used to rent the whole back, and they used to have dances here. The back end of this is where they used to have the Tombarica, old man Skrivanic. He on the back, and they opened the back door. You could hear it all over Riverside. Plinkety plink plink. Okay, so Bothwell, he had a whole bunch of rental cabins here. And that one is right there is the original, one of the cabins left. That one on the end. That's one of the original cabins. That's something new. But this was all cabins. 2 rows of them. Row in the front here and row down on 16th. And I was asked just about every time what that cabin was. But that's one of the original cabins. That's the original cabin, that little yellow one. Okay, now we'll go down this way. Now Gus Pulpitch's store was right there. See where that boat is? That was all the Pulpitch property. And it went all the way up, you know, and your granddad lived right behind the store. So see what's there now with a junkyard. And this used to be 2 houses that were brought from the river also. The Silvernail family and they were Foresti and the Williams family. But you know, but the kids, they went fishing with some of the fishermen too. Now right here was Gus Pulpitch's store right there. Then there was between the Gergich's house, he had a pathway where we could walk, you know, it was about this wide, all the way up. And then see from our house right there, it was just come down to the store. Half of the people that way went to the Budnick store. The other half went this way. So this was the Pulpitch's store right here. Now here's the Luka Vidlich's house right here. And it looks like it's still good, real good shape.
Yeah.
That was, and then the whole front yard, John, was garden. Huh. And in between on the side was garden. And then this was Luca's house, and this was John's Vidlich's house right here. You know, Andy and Bruv.
Yeah, right.
That was their house. So we were standing right here in front with, I had about 30 or 40, 50 people with me right here. And so the nephew, when he showed me the picture, he said, it looks like it. I said, yeah, well, that's it. So that is it.
This is Vidlich's house.
This is Vidlich's house. That's what they lived in. But there never was a garage here. And so when the lady came out, she says, is there something wrong? I said, no. And I told her that story.
Love it.
And then the back half up there, back half of Vidlich's where the Kovich had the house. So that was the last of the Slavs on this street. And then in that house, Cheskov's. There was a little house right here. Luby Cheskov, old man Cheskov. It was a little house right here on this piece of property. That's where the Luby Cheskov lived.
Do you know that that my grandfather accompanied Luba when he brought him over because he was a young man?
Really?
And they came on a French liner.
Really?
And my grandfather, because he was educated in Algiers, he spoke French and went to French schools. So Luba always told me that they got the best of service on that French liner because my grandfather spoke French.
I'll be damned.
Yeah.
Well, Luba could speak Russian too.
Russian, because his wife was Russian, yeah.
Well, they were right here. So this was their house. Then, then all of a sudden they left. They went back to the old country.
Right, yeah.
And then they came back again.
Yeah.
Old man Ante, Tony was his dad. So now It goes all the way up to the very end. So now we're getting into my other tour now.
So there was no Nashki people up in that
No.
area.
Oh yeah, there was down
Oh, yeah?
on that side. The Sardaros lives down
Oh, is that
there.
right?
And during the war, my brother was telling me that right alongside they had barrage balloons, and they had an army encampment there.
Oh, is that so?
And Mrs. Sardaroff would make pastries for those guys, and their sons were in the service. And so those soldiers, to pay back, would dig the garden for her
Right?
and help her out, do everything. And she would give them all kinds of Slav dishes. But there's lots of stories from here on south, a lot of stories, but it's a different deal. So we've run out of Slavs. Well, folks, this is the end of one tour. I have 4 different tours. This one is the one. Then I have one that goes down, including 16th and all the way down to Marginal Way. I tell all about the industries and everything is down there. Then I go around under the bridge and cover all that area there. And then I go up on the bridge, the low bridge, and tell the story there. I can point out a lot of different things. Anyhow, I do this with the auspices of the Historical Society. And I do it voluntarily. I enjoy talking to people. Okay, John, it's nice to talk about the old days, huh? I'm ashamed how this is altered. See, this originally was zoned residential. And from the west side of West Marginal Way was a small business. So there was 5 grocery stores in Riverside here. But now, during the war, they changed the zoning. So this is, I guess, it's all industrial now.
Was that when all of our people started leaving? Or did they start leaving before that?
When I got out of the service, John, I noticed, I got out in 45, and I remember there was half of Riverside moved to West Seattle or other places. You know, the big thing was, John, Riverside had an awful bad name. I don't know why. Everybody wanted to move to West Seattle. But my wife says, you know, West Seattle during the Depression was the same condition.
Yeah. So they didn't consider this really West Seattle over here. Over there
is
West Seattle.
Yeah.
This is Riverside.
This is Riverside.